Hello, hello, and welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. I'm your host, Atlas Alex, and today the title of this talk is The Way of Iron. And remarkably, it's not about Conan the Barbarian or any of the Robert E. Howard novels. Um, you might think so because that title makes it seem like or sound like we'll be talking about some sort of strange, archaic uh, cult to iron, the historians' erroneous designation of the Iron Ages of the past, when swords and boards, right? Swords and armor ruled the day. No, that's not exactly the iron that we're speaking of. We're speaking, of course, of the Iron Age, our age, this age, the final age of any humanity is its Iron Age, because all humanities go through 4 ages: gold, silver, bronze, and finally iron. And that is why the graphic for today's live stream and the background is suitably chosen from, in this case, uh, the Cyberpunk 2077, I believe, is the name of the title. It's a video game, but that whole cyberpunk genre or subgenre of science fiction that postulates this rather dark, in some cases post-apocalyptic, but not always, just a very dark, technocratic vision of the future. And it is that focus on technology, it is that focus on mechanicity that defines an Iron Age, and why the way of iron, as suggests by everything from and since the Industrial Revolution, is that we're really talking about machines, mechanicity. Iron is an unforgiving, uncompromising substance. It is very dense, it is heavy, and to some degree it is durable. But iron has this tendency, as we all know, if we have all owned automobiles or anything else made of iron, or steel for that matter, we know that it has a tendency to rust. So iron is certainly not as durable as gold. One of the reasons why gold is held in such high regard and valued is because gold does not tarnish, not like silver, not like bronze, both of which oxidize. But whereas silver may tarnish and bronze oxidizes and gets that blue green color in its oxidization as it oxidizes. You can see that if you, in your travels, you may see old buildings that have these green roofs. Well, those roofs are actually copper, and they've oxidized, and bronze has that same characteristic. But iron rusts. Iron rusts. And rust is on a whole different level of oxidization. And it loses, whatever is rusting, loses all of its structural integrity, all of its strength, and it just crumbles. You can You can grab rusted iron that has rusted through, and it'll fall, it'll crumble in your hands like dry paper mache, or like a cracker or something, right? It's just, and you hear phrases like the Rust Belt, right? There's that zone in the United States that used to be the hub of manufacturing, not just in North America, but the world. And now they refer to it as the Rust Belt because all of those abandoned, dilapidated turn of the century industrial era metalworks, steelworks, ironworks, and they all had their heyday. And now that's, of course, everything is uh, gone in a very different direction. Manufacturing these days, it's all, alloys and plastics and computer chips, silicone. So iron, ironically, um, sort of had its day in terms of the industrialization um, of the world, the Industrial Revolution. It began with iron, but we've moved on from iron, despite the fact that iron still plays a major role in certain types of manufacturing. So you think of those mega ships, those container ships, oil tankers. I mean, they're still made of iron. They need the strength that comes with iron. And if you recall, last year there was that tragedy of those individuals who went deep down into the ocean in a diving bell that was made from composites. It was made from composite materials like carbon fiber and various different high tech compounds that were not iron. And suffice it to say, despite what these materials promised on paper and what they promised in terms of structural integrity under sort of laboratory conditions, testing the tolerances that they had, etc. James Cameron, who, as you know, is a well-known enthusiast of deep sea ocean exploration. I mean, we all are familiar with his film Titanic, and he bookends his film with a deep sea excursion to the wreck of the ship. He came out very publicly, and he expressed his obviously his condolences for the tragedy to family members for their loss, but he also expressed very publicly his disdain for anyone believing that they can replace iron with these high-tech composite materials. He was the first one out to say that they simply do not have the the characteristics necessary in order to resist the incredible pressures of deep ocean exploration. Iron, on the other hand, for better or for worse, it's not sexy. It doesn't have that high tech carbon fiber composite material sex appeal like it's the latest and greatest high tech, you know, material. It's iron. it's very it's ancient, but it also is incredibly strong, and it is pliable. Even in its strength, it can bend. It will bend before it breaks. And also it is, look, it's not by accident that human beings have been working with iron for hundreds and hundreds of years, you know, right? More than thousands of years, actually. And from the first time that blacksmiths began working with iron, right up until today, when we're still using iron in things like submarines and megaships and like the diving bells that I'm describing that Jim Cameron and others use to explore the bottom of the oceans. Because these composite materials like carbon fiber, yeah, they're high tech and they're fantastic and they have all of these wonderful qualities and they're excellent in airplanes and in other applications where the lightness is important, but they simply do not have the tolerances for bending and resisting um, those extreme pressures. So iron has, in many ways, formed the foundation of human civilization in the modern era. Iron was the basis and the foundation for the Industrial Revolution. Iron represents the cornerstone of modern civilization and life for this humanity in the modern era. When you consider all of the manufacturing that has been done since the Industrial Revolution, you think about things like the steam engine, and the steam engine powering, right, steaming locomotives, and then the steam ships that replace the wooden galleons and the wooden sailing ships, right? They were replaced with steamships. Well, there's no way to construct a steam engine out of anything other than iron. Again, because of the tremendous pressures involved. And you think of those steam locomotives and the incredible weight that those engines carried, that they pulled behind them, not only their own weight, but dozens and dozens of cars laden with coal, oil, people, and all manner of resources and all manner of goods that were being carried across continents. This was all made possible because of iron. So anyone who believes in just the contemporary archaeologists' definition that the Iron Age happened thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago and has nothing to do with us today are ignorant of the facts that are before their eyes. As the self-evident facts is that the modern era could not exist without iron. The whole of the Industrial Revolution, and today, to this day, the advanced metalworks, it's the smelting of steel and all the rest of it happens within these refineries and these forges that are all made out of iron. There's nothing else that we have that can endure those intense heat and pressure. And when you look at industrial presses and those machinery that does the injection molding for all of the plastic that we have and all of the body parts on cars, right? So whether it's plastic or steel, the presses that hold together the injection molding, those are all iron, right? Industrial presses, it's all iron. There's nothing else that has that kind of durability and strength. And it's really the foundation of the modern industrial era, which we find ourselves in, which, of course, is highly mechanical. It's very mechanistic. It's industrial. These are all words that are practically synonymous with one another. So we are in the Iron Age of this humanity. And like my description of iron, how strong it is, how durable it is, how versatile, and how resilient to intense pressure and heat and all the other forces that we can throw at it, iron endures and resists. In the same way, humanity thinks that way about itself, about the age that we're living in. We believe that we are at the pinnacle of human civilization, and that in many ways we are, like iron itself, incredibly versatile, incredibly resilient, that we are inherently strong, but somewhat flexible and pliable in that strength. So we have a tolerance for extremes, because we know that life tends to throw extreme circumstances at us and at civilization. And we look at things like the First World War, the Second World War, the advent of nuclear weapons, the various different natural disasters, things like events like 9/11, like the sinking of the Titanic, or these, or in more recent years, COVID, even, right? We look at these circumstances and we think to ourselves, well, we survived that. We survived all of these terrible events, these tragedies, these challenges, these forces of nature. We must be like iron, inherently strong and but flexible to a degree that we can tolerate these extremes, these extreme stresses and pressures that are applied to us. We as a humanity, we will endure, we will survive, because we have this heart of iron. And it's interesting because there's actually a Marvel character in the Marvel comics called Ironheart. We know about Iron Man. Iron Man is, one of the most popular characters of the Marvel film franchise, um, played by Robert Downey Jr. And he was also the first, Iron Man was the first of the Marvel characters to make it to the big screen outside of the Hulk, because the Incredible Hulk and Spider-Man, they were first, but in the recent run of Marvel superhero movies, uh, Iron Man was really kicked off that phase one of the Marvel era. But there is a female version of Iron Man, so they don't call her Iron Man; they call her Iron Heart. And supposedly, she has her own movie coming out sometime in the months or perhaps years to come. So whether it's Iron Man or Iron Heart, you see that word, that substance, that notion holds a cachet with it. It brings with it everything that I've described to you about the qualities of iron and the strength, the resilience, the endurance, that humanity likes to think of itself at this time in this age that it considers to be the peak of human civilization, the Iron Age of humanity. But the important thing here about iron and our discussion of iron is to remember that iron is the basis, the foundation for all of our machines and the mechanization of civilization. The Industrial Revolution, as I was describing earlier, was made possible only because of iron. And incidentally, in most languages, certainly in Europe and in the West, in most languages, you will find that one of the most popular surnames is Smith, or the equivalent of Smith in whatever language. In English, Smith is far and away the most common surname. And in Hungarian, I happen to know this because my parents were Hungarian and I speak fluently, and I happen to know this, that the word Kovács, which is the Hungarian word for smith, or specifically blacksmith, Kovács is one of the most common Hungarian names, surname or first name, but mostly surname. Just like Smith. Why? Because no matter where you went in Europe, since the fall of the Roman Empire, it didn't matter what village you went to, from the Dark Ages to the modern era, the modern industrial era, until eventually, the modern industrial era began to take over the role of the blacksmith. Every village had a blacksmith. The blacksmith was an essential aspect of human civilization. Certainly in the West, in Europe, and eventually North America, the blacksmith was essential because it was the blacksmith who did everything from making tools to shoeing horses, right? Making horseshoes, and plows for tilling the soil, and scythes for reaping the harvest. You would be hard pressed, and the metal straps, the bands that went around barrels for storing food, not just in wintertime, but if people were taking a voyage. So the whole process of colonialism, or the first steps of what we now call globalization, where these mighty galleons would travel great distances overseas. Well, they had to be able to store large amounts of food and other provisions on these ships. But then there's the ships themselves and the construction of those ships. They weren't all just made out of wood. They were wood and iron. And who worked the iron? The iron workers, the molders, the shapers, the smelters, and the those who tempered iron and tempered steel. Those were the blacksmiths. And every village had a blacksmith. Villages couldn't survive without one, because again, all of their metal tools, they would need to be sharpened or repaired or refurbished or made anew. And that was the work of the blacksmith. And that's why you find the surname Smith is the most common. It doesn't matter what language in Europe you go to, whether it's Hungarian or English or German, it doesn't matter. I I'm willing to bet money that the equivalent of Smith is the most common surname, because the Smith was the one who worked the iron that made the ironworks, the iron goods that was required for civilization to not just survive, but to thrive. And then later, as things developed and history unfolded, from the Dark Ages to the Middle Ages, and if you know your history and if you know your military history, then you know that eventually came all manner of warfare and war machines, and there was all manner of armors, and then eventually, with the not the advent of, but the importation of gunpowder from the East, then you had the advanced weaponry. You had the cannon and the cannonball, and the advent of those technologies required a specialized kind of a blacksmith. They were known as a gunsmith. Those who, yes, they could work with iron, they could work with metal, but they had to work with much, much finer tolerances. They had to have a much greater precision with their ironworks. Because if a cannonball was not the right shape, or the barrel of a gun wasn't bored out to the correct tolerances, then either the gun would blow up in your hand, or the cannon would blow up. So there is this practical, self-evident, meaningful, historical connection between modern civilization and iron. But you can also gather from that last little bit of connecting the blacksmith to the technologies, the machines of war, the weapons of war, and colonialism and globalization and industrialization, that there is an intimate relationship between iron and ego, between iron and greed, iron and desire for control, to build empire, to control resources, to control others, to control humans. After all, we have the expression to be thrown in irons, right? Shackled to irons. We have the history of the slave trade, right? With people clapped in irons. That's the expression, to be clapped in irons. Then we can visualize human beings in so-called chain gangs, where they're shackled to one another at their ankles to heavy iron chains, and the iron bars of prison cells and dungeon cells, if you want to go all the way back to the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, where the taking of opponents defeated in battle, the taking them and holding them at ransom was a common practice. Iron, like all things, iron is not inherently evil. Iron was there to allow humanity to flourish and prosper, but the versatility of iron, the strength, the resilience, made it an irresistible substance to ego. It was seen as a tremendous means to be able to fulfill egoic desires. And whether it was a suit of armor to protect against the steel of your enemies, that suit of armor that fed the desire of fear, the desire to not die, the fear of death, or if it was the aforementioned iron shackles and iron bars and iron weapons that were used to subdue and control and ultimately enslave other human beings. Iron was a means to an end. And it was incredibly valuable, not so much by weight as we value gold, but the knowledge of how to work with iron. And its value as a means to attaining gold. I mean, even very practically, when you think of the gold rush out west in the United States, how first of all, you start looking for gold by panning for gold. You need a pan. But then, in order to get at the gold, you need a pick. At the very least, you need a pickaxe. You're not going to get very far mining for gold with a bronze pickaxe. Bronze is very soft, right? Compared to iron, bronze might as well be butter. And then even if you did hollow out a gold mine, gold is very heavy. And being able to, you needed to get the big heavy chunks of rock that had the gold in it. You had to get that out of the mine to the surface, where it could then be crushed into smaller pieces and the gold extracted, heated up, and like all the various different ways that they had for extracting the gold from the bedrock. Well, how do you get hundreds of tons of rock up out of a mine to the surface? Well, you need mining carts, and you put down little railroad ties, and you have iron mining carts. It's very, very, very difficult to mine for gold without iron. So iron made all of that possible, like it made so much of our modern era possible. And so much of our modern era was fueled by ego, by ambition, by desire for more, for bigger. To put another way, the Iron Age is intimately related to the Black Lodge, to ego. Iron is the substance that ego most prefers to work with, and that ego builds the Tower of Babel on. It's built on iron. It's built with iron and built on iron. Look at all of the skyscrapers in New York City. You can look at all of those photographs from the early 20th century where the men are sitting on the iron girders, right? the iron beams and the iron girders, and they're eating their lunch. All of modern building is based on iron. Even concrete, our modern version of concrete, we wouldn't be able to have concrete anything if it wasn't for the fact that we have iron rebar in the concrete. It's called reinforced concrete for that reason. So secretly, despite the fact that when you look at a building, it's a red brick building, or if it's a concrete building, or it's a stone building, or whatever it may be that we're looking at, if it was built in the modern era, it was built on a skeleton of iron. So all the ambition, all the desire, all the greed, all the desire for control, all the pride, right? And I'm not the only one who has ever made the connection between skyscrapers and how they are tremendous phallic symbols. I'm not the only one to ever make the connection between that pride, that ego, going into these towers of power, and why there's been a race since the erection of, what was it, that, it's not the Statue of Liberty, the New York City. So these grand skyscrapers, and there's been a race between millionaires and billionaires ever since, till now. We have the Burj Dubai, or the Khalifa, or whatever the hell that tower is called, in Abu Dhabi. It's the world's tallest building, but now somebody else somewhere else is wanting to build an even taller one. It's like this, yeah, it's like comparing erections, right? Erection of this building compared to an erection of that building. I'm not the first one to make this observation. And at the root of it all is iron. It's the Iron Age. This is the nature of the Iron Age. And it is the way of iron. That its purpose, it seems, is to be that foundation for the technologically advanced, highly mechanized humanity. But iron rusts. Iron does not last. Somewhere in the skeletal hearts of those skyscrapers is a substance that is oxidizing and will eventually crumble and turn to dust. And whatever it's supporting will crumble and collapse in on itself. Which is why you see on a regular basis buildings being demolished, intentionally demolished. Because for all of its strength and for all of its apparent endurance and resilience, iron is not gold. Iron oxidizes, it tarnishes under its just being exposed to oxygen, and will eventually crumble under its own weight. It rusts and turns to dust. And there's a reason why in English, rust and dust are so similar in words. But it goes without saying that iron rules in the Iron Age. The way of iron rules. And the intimate relationship between iron and ego means that ego rules. The Black Lodge rules during the Iron Age. This shouldn't be a contentious statement. This should be self-evident. Just looking back historically, certainly since the importation of gunpowder from the East and the introduction of that kind of warfare and the advent of the steam engine and steam locomotion and the Industrial Revolution. Until now, mechanicity has ruled humanity, and the Black Lodge is mechanicity. The Black Lodge is ego, and egos are mechanical algorithms of nature. They're inseparable. This is why we call this the Iron Age. But the question, if you haven't asked, we asked in the description of today's live stream, we asked this question. The question is why? If divine nature rules humanity during the Golden Age and the Silver Age and the Bronze Age, we can say the influence of mechanical nature is growing upon humanity as the law of entropy takes hold and humanity becomes less and less conscious, say more unconscious, more mechanical, as it moves from gold to silver to bronze and to finally iron. But somehow, in the Silver and Bronze ages, humanity is still oriented towards the divine. And we can see that. We can look back, even though there are ebbs and flows, right? And within, let's say, civilizations and empires, there's a rise and there's a fall. So obviously, if you look at the period of time during the fall of the Roman Empire, you would be hard pressed to say, oh, wow, look how conscious everybody is. No, obviously, that empire is in decline. But on whole, on balance, humanity has been more conscious during its Silver and Bronze eras. But when we move into the Iron Age, that is when mechanicity takes hold. And arguably, the Iron Age for this humanity began 2,000 years ago. So before the fall of the Roman Empire, just at the beginning of the fall of the Roman Empire. And that the Iron Age was marked by the arrival of Jesus of Nazareth and his ministry in the Middle East. That the avatar of avatars, the master of masters for this planet, came and performed the greatest of miracles just in time to prepare humanity and give humanity some divine spark, some divine light to be able to hold on to as humanity plunged into the Iron Age with the collapse of the Roman Empire. But strangely, even as the Roman Empire is in decline and collapse, Emperor Constantine holds the Council of Nicaea, and he converts the whole of the Roman Empire to Catholicism. And the Roman Catholic Church is established. And even though nowadays the Roman Catholic Church has a very negative connotation in the eyes of many for its many so-called atrocities that it's performed throughout the ages, the fact of the matter is that if it was not for Roman Catholicism, we would not have the Christian world that we do today. Christianity has reached all the four corners of the world, and you will find Christians in every nation on earth, every continent and every nation on earth. And it is, in the modern era, Christianity is the most overtly Christian worshiping, Christ worshiping religion that we have. Even or you might even say, especially those denominations which broke away from the Catholic Church, because you have many, 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 many Christian sects. But what is amazing about all of that diversity in Christianity is that they all hold fast and true to the worship of Christ. Now, do they also, unfortunately and lamentably, believe that Christ is a man, and have they fallen into idolatry? By and large, yes. However, they, if you speak with most born-again Christians, they will tell you about the deep personal relationship that they have with Christ. They might equate that to Jesus because of the indoctrinated idolatry, but we cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater. We cannot deny that their love of Jesus and their faith comes through a personal connection to their innermost intimate Christ. Whether or not they are cognizant of it on that level, or they just believe that Jesus is inside of them and Jesus speaks to them. Like Joan of Arc, for example, when she was a young child, and she said that God speaks to me. Wow, it was her innermost. It was her innermost intimate Christ speaking to her, whispering to her through the still small voice. But a child doesn't necessarily process it that way. And in the time that Joan of Arc was a child, and the access of the information when it came to metaphysical phenomenon, all that she knew, she learned in church and what was shared from the Catholic Church. So obviously she would interpret through the framework of that indoctrination. So it must be that God is speaking to me. Well, what else could it be? So Christianity, the Christ, has been the fire of fire and the light of lights for humanity through the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, and then through the so-called Enlightenment and the development of these so-called Enlightenment values that even Jordan Peterson and others will explicitly state come from the biblical corpus and the tradition of Western Catholicism, and to some degree, Eastern Orthodoxy, but certainly Catholicism, Christianity. And because Christianity embraces the Old Testament, you have the Judeo-Christian traditions, in other words. The Judeo-Christian tradition is the backbone and the foundation for the so-called Enlightenment era philosophy and Enlightenment era humanism. And the constitutions and the end of slavery and many other facets of what we consider to be the light of Western democratic society, the meritocracy and so on and so forth. Even the American dream. And the fact that Christianity is so strong, especially in the Midwest of the United States, it's in on the dollar bill. It says "In God We Trust," and it's it's in the American Constitution, and it's in there, the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are mottos and goals whose foundations are profoundly based in the Judeo-Christian tradition, in that light, in the light of Christ. And it's been that light that has been guiding humanity through what, for all intents and purposes, in every other way, has been a decline, has been a downward spiral into mechanicity. Yes, it's been an explosion of technological wonders. It's been a absolute, undeniable cornucopia of scientific discoveries, of incredible machines able to perform unbelievable feats of earthworks or transportation, or these incredible cranes and these incredible dump trucks and excavators and drilling machines, and you name it. I mean, we marvel at our own technological prowess. I mean, there are television programs on the Discovery Channel devoted to mega machines and mega building projects and mega this and mega that. And we marvel at these things. We say, well, because they're quite extraordinary feats of engineering. And just as we marvel at the very, very big, these mega machines, we also are fascinated by the very, very, very small. The more miniaturized our machines, the more fascinated we are by them. And in recent years, the advent of nanotechnology has sparked the imagination of countless peoples. This idea that soon there will be nano-sized machines, meaning the term nano comes from a nanometer, which is what, 1/millionth of a meter. I believe a nanometer is 1/1000th of a millimeter. I might be wrong on that, but it's very, very, very small. But the idea of a nano machine, for example, is a machine that will be able to go in and repair cellular damage on a cellular level. These little nanobots. And nanobots have been a feature in science fiction for 20 years now. And 20, 30 years ago, that's all it was. It was science fiction. But now it's science fact. And the incredible miniaturization of digital technology, of computer chips. And they're now talking about, of course, they're talking about quantum computing. So in the Iron Age, we have this fascination with the very, very, very big expression and manifestation of iron and the way of iron in the mega. And then we have the fascination with the expression and the mastery of ironworks in the micro. And not just the micro, but the nano. Because micro comes from micron, right? So a micromillimeter should be 1,000 times smaller than a millimeter, and then so a nanometer is 1,000 times smaller than a micrometer. If I got that right, then it's 1,000 times 1,000. Anyway, it's very, 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 very small. As you can tell, it's been a long time since I took biology class, and and it's a long time since and so these are the things that I did not actually commit to memory so much because I did not have a life of in science. But again, we come back to this question: why? Why? Why does the way of iron rule during this Iron Age? Why does the Black Lodge rule? What is the point? Everything has a reason, everything has a purpose. And an age, if we say the Golden Age is ruled by divine nature, and that its purpose is to allow humanity to experience a kind of heaven on earth for 1,000 years or more, and be able to see into the higher dimensions while we are here in this physical dimension, and be able to comprehend the interplay. So why it is in the past that people used to be able to see fairies and talk about fairies and spirits, and they talked about these phenomenon as if they were everyday phenomenon, because for them they were everyday phenomenon, because they were more conscious, they were more awake, they were able to see the fourth dimension interlaced with the third dimension. So we can't anymore. Those who can, they call themselves clairvoyant, or they think of themselves as being very, very, very special, or very awake, or very, enlightened, or whatever. Or maybe some of them think they're themselves crazy because they see things that nobody else sees. They see something and nobody else can see it. So modern science, psychology, neuropsychology, wants to say to that person, "Oh, you're hallucinating. We better put you on an anti-hallucinogen." In other words, we should put your mind even more to sleep. We should put your consciousness even more to sleep by giving you these mechanical drugs that are going to affect what you see and how you see it. Mugaboo says, "It is as if the more technologically evolved we have become, the more dense, the less spiritual we have become." Yeah, it's precisely that, actually. If you consider, for instance, the fact that most of us Oh, let me. He follows up. He says, but this was expected. We went from one extreme to another, from more spiritual societies or civilizations to more physical civilizations. Yeah, it's expected. It is expected because of the law of entropy, which is things move, things break down. And things break down over time, and nothing lasts forever. Anything that manifests on this level of reality is subject to the laws of physical nature. And the laws of physical nature, mechanical nature, includes the law of decay, decline, degeneration, and death. There's no avoiding it. Things die. Death is real. There's no avoiding it. I come into contact with people all the time, spiritual people, who are desperate to avoid death. And if you try to bring it up with them, they're okay, but okay, fine. I'm not afraid of death. I can face death, but I just don't need to focus on it. Because to me, it's focusing on it is like it's like the glass is half empty. It's like somehow focusing on the inevitable. It's like it's some kind of like a morbid obsession. And yet, it is so often that individuals who find themselves on their deathbed, or who find themselves, I recently watched a documentary about the 2011 tornado that went through this Midwest Missouri town, Jonah, I believe, and he just wiped the town off the face of the earth. And the documentary includes the first-hand accounts of individuals who were in the storm, not just in the tornado, but they eventually even found themselves in the eye of the tornado. If you can imagine a tornado so massive, a supermassive tornado, a vortex that is so wide that it actually develops an eye, like an eye of the hurricane, that when the tornado was passing through, the eye was also passing through. So for a minute or two, as a tornado was moving through town, people could experience complete calm and complete stillness and look up and see blue skies. But they were in the heart of a tornado, a category 5. Like, tornadoes are on a different scale than hurricanes. This was like the Hurricane Katrina of tornadoes. This it was an absolute complete. And one of the first-hand accounts was of someone who was driving, and their SUV was pulled up into the air, and he was sucked out of the sunroof of his SUV. They found him like it, it was like, to hear some of these stories and to hear some of these firsthand experiences was quite incredible. But one of these young fellows who was sucked out of this vehicle, and he was describing how in that moment he thought for sure that he was about to die, and he actually had that, literally his life flashing before his eyes. This is why Master Samael said we can learn very little from the phenomenon of birth, but from death we can learn everything. Death is the great teacher. In the movie Gladiator, Marcus Aurelius, the emperor Marcus Aurelius, tells Maximus, he says, I am dying, Maximus. When a man sees his end, he wants to know that there was some meaning, some purpose to his life. You see, death is the great arbiter. Death is the great mirror. Death is the great day of judgment. It's when a man faces his death, when he sees his end approaching, he invariably looks backward upon his life, and he wants to know that there was some purpose, some meaning to it all. And it's the end. It is death that calls him to that introspection and that retrospection in a way that no other phenomenon can or ever will. This is why we have these cliches about people's life passing before their eyes, or people on their deathbed recounting their all their behaviors and decisions and actions in life, and either expressing regret or expressing gratitude, or a combination of both. People praying for redemption or praying for forgiveness. Why? Because they're on their deathbed. It doesn't matter what religion they are. It doesn't matter if they're atheists. It doesn't matter what they believe in or don't believe in. It doesn't matter. Death is the great equalizer. Rich or poor, black or white, doesn't matter what creed or color. It doesn't matter. Death visits us all. To deny it, to say that it doesn't exist, to say that I don't need to focus on it or I don't need to obsess over it. Nobody's obsessing over it. We don't need to obsess over it. But to fail to make use of it, to fail to listen, to fail to hear death's call, and to fail to do the work that death challenges us to do. And when Magabu says here, all this mechanicity, all this technology, it seems to be making us more physical, more empirical, and less spiritual. Well, this humanity is doubling down on that mechanicity, on empiricism, on physicality, and now on digital technology, on AI. Humanity is doubling down on its own cleverness, and where it has begun to lose faith in its own cleverness and in its own mental ability, mental acuity, as a mechanical, rational mind, through its cleverness, it has now created these externalized gods to worship called AI, and it gives them fancy names, fancy techie, nerdy names like Grok and ChatGPT and all the other ones, Gemini. And it has these externalized mechanical minds with access to huge server farms and all the access to all the information on the internet now. And humanity expects these new super minds, these new mega minds, to be able to solve problems and answer questions that have eluded the mechanical rational mind of the monkey mind of the humanoid machine. because humanity has become less able to hear the still soft voice, less common to be inspired and to receive genuine imagination. So everything is becoming just a copy of a copy of a copy, a regurgitation, an adaptation. And in many ways, the spiritual life force, the vitality, the youthful exuberance of humanity is running out. Of course, because we're in the Iron Age. It's the equivalent of old age. And if you recall, a few weeks back, few months back now, we began 2025 looking at that millionaire fellow who is trying to find the secret of the fountain of youth. And if you recall, we spent an entire live stream looking at him in that documentary on Netflix, looking at his exploration of all of these so-called longevity technologies. Why? Because he doesn't want to die. And he sees old age not as a inevitable and beautiful lyrical part of a full life. He treats old age as a disease whose symptoms can be managed, and a disease that he believes wholeheartedly can be cured, and thus death averted, if not altogether avoided. And how does he do that? He turns to technology. He turns to empiricism. He turns to physicality. He chooses the way of iron. Because I've expressed any number of times now how the accumulation of wealth and power and influence and control, all of that feeds into the desire of fear of death, the ultimate unwelcome outcome, right? The desire to control outcomes is fear of unwanted outcomes. While death is the single greatest primordial unwanted outcome. And what is the greatest primordial desired outcome? Well, that's the orgasm. That's lust. That's the outcome that every animal wants: to reproduce, to mate, to pass along their genes, to pass along their DNA to the next generation. And what outcome does every animal, every beast, every living thing fear the most? Well, it's death. That's why fear and lust are consorts, Lilith and Asmodan, because those are the two universal outcomes that define mechanical nature and define all animals and all animal behavior. You will not find an animal that willingly goes to its death. a praying mantis, a male praying mantis who successfully mates with a female, his first act after successfully mating with a female is to have his head decapitated by said female. So it just goes to show you that on the balance scale between lust and fear, right? It just shows you what the hierarchy is. Lust comes first. Desire, right? It's desire that's at the top. And right beneath that is fear. And the two are very close. They're intimately related. So on the macro level, humanity is approaching its death. And the Black Lodge is preparing humanity for its final destruction. And we've explored this many, many times in many ways. And one of the ways that it does that is the erosion, the undermining of the foundations of humanity, which are spiritual, which are metaphysical, and via the way of iron, which is getting that humanity to rely ever more on iron and everything that is based in iron, on external, physical, material, right? The frameworks, the superstructure, the infrastructure, the foundations that are all iron based. So we forget our metaphysical foundations, and instead we're doubling down on these physical foundations, but the strongest, most reliable, most resilient, and most versatile of substances, which is iron. And that's all fine for the macro level. But what about you and I? What about on the level of microcosm? What does all of this have to do with ourselves and our own spiritual paths, our own spiritual journeys? Sure, we can talk about meditating on our death. We can talk about retrospecting on our life and finding the meaning and purpose and gratitude in everything that happened to us and everything that we allowed to happen through us. But the fact that the world seems to be ruled by the Black Lodge, how does that serve us who are on the spiritual path, the path of awakening and self-realization? What does the way of iron have to teach us? And are there lessons that only it can teach us? One of the reasons why I decided to go with this topic today was I mentioned I saw the documentary about the tornado. It was on Netflix, by the way. I wish I could remember the name of it. But the other reason is that our washing machine broke down. And I spent the better part of yesterday and this morning, yesterday disassembling it and researching what the problem was and ordering the parts, and today reassembling it. This morning, reassembling it. And when you experience a breakdown of a machine that you rely on, invariably it leads to certain emotional and mental responses. Sometimes emotional reactions, sometimes mental reactions. But also it can lead to a sort of contemplative process by which you take a moment to take stock of of how reliant you are on that particular machine, and how your plans for the day, i.e., to do laundry, go out the window when the washing machine breaks down. But you can't really contemplate and comprehend the impact that a machine has on you without taking stock of where you are at in your life and who you really are. If you really start delving into it and start unpacking the implications, you might say, "Oh, that's silly. You're just, you're talking about a washing machine breaking down. How can you turn that into some sort of existential metaphysical exercise? Your washing machine broke down." Well, if that's the way you think about it, and that's what you feel, and that's if you think that's the limit of all there is to know, well, then fine. But what aspect of you was reliant on the washing machine, or on your automobile, or on your oven, or your computer? Is there an alternative? What would you do without these machines? What did you do before you had these machines? Or did you ever know life without these machines? And can you imagine life without these machines in the future? And who do these machines really serve? Why do they exist? And now we're just talking about, appliances. But now take it to the next step, that we're living in the Iron Age. What has been lost, do you think, in humanity since the advent of the microwave oven? Just as I can say, even for my own part, I mean, I never had a good sense of direction, don't get me wrong. But I can tell you that since most of us rely on a little device called the GPS now to get us from A to B, I can tell you that people's sense of direction is just going down the toilet. Because why should I bother exercising my sense of direction? Why should I bother developing that when I've got my phone in my pocket and I've got 24/7 access to Google Maps and I got a GPS and a compass, and so, I just punch in where I want to go and my phone will guide me there. Benjamin says, I think the lack of a real sense of religiosity, introspection, and love of truth is lacking in current humanity, as most of us have been complacent and trusted materialist science. That's certainly one of the byproducts of the cult of empiricism, of the way of iron, is the reductionist iron. It's not like gold, is it? Gold, at least in the ancient world and right up until relatively recently, gold was used to adorn uh, images of God, of saints, of the heavens. Gold is the closest thing that we have. It's like gold and diamonds, like gold and gemstones, gold and diamonds, to that reflects the perfection of divinity. You look at the icons of the Greek Orthodox Church, and these golden backgrounds with these images, and it's this attempt at creating this three-dimensional space of resplendence to try to capture the resplendence of the beings being depicted, these divine beings. Think of all the golden Buddhas that you find in the East. Think of the gold leaf and gold foil adorning the ceilings and altars of countless cathedrals, and the golden calligraphy and scripts of Sufi mosques. We don't use gold like that much anymore. Most people, when they think of gold, they think of gold bars and investing in gold because they feel like the end is coming, and they feel like the economy is about to collapse and the dollar is about to collapse. Oh, so I better hold on to some gold. They're thinking of the value of gold in economic terms, in utilitarian terms, in other words. They have an Iron Age mentality toward the substantive foundation of the Golden Age, which is the fact that gold is impervious to tarnish. Gold does not oxidize. Gold has a permanence to it, and it has a resplendence to it, and gold has a versatility to it. It is so malleable. But perhaps most importantly, gold has an inherent divinity to it. We do not possess a substance that can greater express our spirituality, our religiosity, our love of the divine, our gratitude, and our humility in the face of that which is truly permanent. Those are the qualities of gold, as opposed to its quantifiable value, which is a very Iron Age way of thinking. Because remember, iron is practical. Iron is a means to an end. And treating gold as a store of value is also a means to an end. The notion that it has inherent economic value, and it's a store of value, so that come what may, whatever happens in the apocalypse or the end times or whatever you want to call it, in a post-apocalyptic world, gold, he who has the gold will make the rules. Gold will represent power. Gold will represent authority. Gold will be a true currency, because it contains power and value in and of itself. But again, that's an Iron Age way of looking at gold. Because it's diminishing gold to its mechanical, materialistic, empirical nature, as opposed to those who recognize in gold its divine nature and its ability to express and glorify and beautify and inspire and make aspirational visages of the divine, expressions of the divine. And a golden age mentality looks at all phenomena in that way. Whereas an Iron Age mentality looks at everything for its utilitarian merit. Its mechanical, physical, utilitarian value. That's iron. That's the iron. That's the way of iron. What can I get out of it? What can it do for me? Which is why at the very beginning I said iron cannot be separated from ego. I run iron. IRON. Gold has the O. Om. Old. Gold. That's the O, the heart chakra. And iron is I. Benjamin says, in the book of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar's dream of a statue with its golden head, silver chest and arms, bronze thighs, iron legs, and feet of iron mixed with clay, symbolizes a progression of world empires, ultimately leading to a fractured kingdom. That final stage is then struck and shattered by a stone. It feels like we're living in the era represented by the feet, strong in parts, but fundamentally divided. And Benjamin also says, I think the Great Pyramids all over the world were built during the golden age of humanity. So, on the first part, you're absolutely correct. That is precisely what Nebuchadnezzar's dream of his statue represents. The progression from gold to silver to bronze to iron. Now, when he says that iron legs and then feet of iron mixed with clay. When you visualize rust, and I mentioned earlier that the word rust and dust are almost the same word. And what rust resembles in color, and if you take crumbling rust and mix it with water, what you will get is a kind of red, you wouldn't call it clay, and yet it has the same color as clay, and rust has the same texture as dried clay. But the implication here is that the iron legs, right, and where the feet touch the earth, where the rust comes into contact with the earth, the moisture and the oxygen, and it oxidizes, it becomes rust, and that it's that clay-like color and texture of rust that intimates that what you end up with eventually is this fractured kingdom, that's shattered by stone, because that's rust becomes very brittle and it loses all of its strength and structural integrity. So it's all there. And what we see happening around us, where things are beginning to collapse, or we're first seeing the signs of the fragility of all of these structures and all of these constructs of the Iron Age. And the second question is, so things like the pyramids represent golden age technology, because you can't build pyramids without metaphysical science and metaphysical technologies, because there's no other way to carve out the blocks and move the blocks around. People have theorized and contemplated and they've come up with all manner of attempts to explain the pyramids mechanically. But the fact of the matter is all those theories never work in practice, because nobody has been able to duplicate and forget about the pyramids of Giza, just the pyramids of in Guatemala or Mexico, Teotihuacan, the Mayan and Aztec pyramids, or go to Peru and or go to Japan or elsewhere in Southeast Asia, and you see the blocks, the walls. Those are that's Lemurian technology. It's not even Atlantean technology. It's Lemurian technology. Those walls have been standing since the times of Lemuria. You know the walls that I'm talking about. The walls that that the blocks are fit together with no mortar, and they're so perfectly fit together that you can't put a piece of paper in between them. And there are blocks that have so many cuts, and it's like they fit together like jigsaw puzzle, but the blocks are 200 tons each. We don't possess technology that could begin to replicate that. And that's because there is no physical technology that can replicate that. There is no physical technology that can build the pyramids. There isn't. Try it. If someone is so sure that the pyramids were built physically, then why don't they go do it? I mean, these people who are supposedly all about empirical science and empirical truth and proving theories right or wrong, they make these claims, and you say, okay, well, if you think that that's how those 200-ton obelisks and what were carved out of a single piece of limestone, well, then go and do it. Do you think they can? Do you think they bothered to even try? All of their attempts have ended up in failure. Or they try a little bit, they do a little, a few square meters, and they say, see, you can do it with bronze chisels. Yeah, how many bronze chisels did you go through doing the 3 square meters worth of carving? And how long did it take you? Now multiply that by how many? And you very quickly run out of people, bronze, and time. But that's the problem. Another problem with the Iron Age and the way of iron, right? Is that iron, it's not particularly bright. Iron is pretty dense. Iron is pretty thick. Iron is kind of like dense and heavy and thick and stubborn. Iron is not all that flexible. We're not talking about like, you know, the light and pliable steel of a Spanish rapier or something. No. We're talking about iron. We're talking about this the substance that we use for horseshoes and we use for anvils, right? Anvils are not known for their flexibility. They're not prized for their flexibility. They're prized, in fact, precisely for their inflexibility, for their solidity, and for their uncompromising nature. The poor coyote on Looney Tunes found that out all too often in his many adventures to try to catch the Roadrunner. But I digress. That's iron. But you see, in the wake of that, confronted with that, faced with the way of iron, we have an opportunity. The way of iron imposes itself on us. And that should also be self-evident. The mechanistic, technological society we live in, the overreach of the technocracy and the technological oligarchy that is emerging, on our lives, into our personal lives, into every aspect of our life, the algorithm creeping in and telling us what it is that we want or that we need just based on what it thinks it knows about us. The imposition of these systems of control, this imposition of these inflexible, thick structures and superstructures, and within our own psychology, within our own psyche, right? Our consciousness clapped in irons, our perception of reality filtered by these iron bars of the prison of our own mind, of our own indoctrination, of our own mentality, the conditioning of our beliefs and subjective ideas about ourselves and concepts about the world. All of that presents us with an opportunity. Like a while back, I did a live stream talking about escape rooms and how an escape room may be the best analogy for life. Well, an escape room is what? Is a kind of prison. You're locked inside. So you are being imposed upon. However, the means to your escape is hidden in clues that are scattered throughout that escape room that you have to go and find. Well, the way of iron presents us with clues. Because as we have been exploring for nearly 2 hours, we know what the strengths of iron are, but we also know its weaknesses, don't we? We also know where the cracks in iron begin to emerge. We know that that iron will bend given a certain amount of pressure, but we also know that iron will break. And we also know that if exposed to too much heat or too much cold, iron becomes susceptible. Its structural integrity starts to waver. So in other words, we know the limits. We know the weaknesses of iron, or at least we should. We're surrounded by enough of it. We are in the Iron Age. We have the way of iron imposed upon us from without and from within. Our own psychology, our own egos are constantly imposing the way of iron on us. Have we studied the shackles around our ankles? Have we studied the bars? Do we know how they work? Do we know where their weaknesses are? In other words, do we know how to escape the way of iron? And what is it within us that we must cultivate and harness in order to exploit the weaknesses of iron, in order to escape the way of iron? I never thought I could take apart a washing machine and put it back together such that it would work again. But it was when the washing machine broke down yesterday that I was confronted with precisely that challenge. It was not that big a deal, to be honest with you. I just did some research on the internet and I found some how-to videos. It showed me step by step what to do. I just had to follow the steps. But I saved, probably upwards around $250, $350 by doing it myself. I would say at minimum. Like my dad was telling me, if you call a repairman these days, just him showing up to the door costs $150. He hasn't even done any work yet. That's just for him to come out to your house to do a house call. But we are not just in the Iron Age, we are in what Benjamin was sharing with us. We're in the feet of that statue, where the iron meets the clay, and it's about to be shattered by stone, which, by the way, that struck and shattered by stone is another allegory. It's another symbol. It's the philosophical stone of sexual magic. The philosophical stone that transmutes lead into gold. Now, lead is a lot closer to iron than it is to gold. Lead is, you could say lead is as soft as gold, but in every other way, lead is more like iron. But that stone, that final stage, right? That final stage is then struck and shattered by a stone. What is it about sexual alchemy? To work with the fires and the waters. When someone is working with iron, a blacksmith, right? He works with water and he works with fire. The hot coals to heat up the metal, and then he quenches the iron in the trough. And it's a very delicate balance working with the iron, working with the fire and the water in order for him to work with that iron. To get the iron to work for you, you have to work with the iron. But to shatter the iron with the stone is to work with the philosophical stone and the fires and waters of sexuality. To ultimately shatter the iron bars and shatter the iron shackles around your feet. To be free of the way of iron. And transmute the lead or the way of iron into the way of gold. Transmute the lead into gold. Transmute the lead of ego into the gold of the human soul, the solar bodies. That is why Master Samael taught openly white tantra and sexual alchemy. And he began doing so in the 50s and the 60s in Mexico and in South America, in his native language. Because he recognized we're in the Iron Age, and the cat's out of the bag anyway. With the New Age and the hippies and everything else going around, people are openly teaching Black Tantra anyway. There was no reason to keep the teaching secret anymore. The cat was out of the bag. And people were teaching Black Tantra, but they were calling it Tantra. They were just calling it Tantra. 99% of schools out there that teach Tantra are teaching Black Tantra. This is what Master Samael was facing. So he says, why? There's no point in keeping the teaching secret anymore. The way of iron, the Iron Age, confronted by that, he took things to another level. He took things to a different level. He opened it up. He went public with teachings that had been secret for thousands of years. The way of iron and all that confronts us in the Iron Age, both without and within, is a challenge. And remember when I was talking a few weeks ago about verses and about the adversary that creates adversity. Why? So that new verses can be written, new stories, new adventures, new acts of heroism, new solutions. The Black Lodge rules during the Iron Age of humanity because it's our last gasp at greatness. And the greater the adversity, the greater the adversary, the greater the stories that can be told. Which is why the avatar of Pisces at the dawn of the Iron Age was Jesus, and look what he faced. Not only the degenerated Jewry and the Pharisees of a degenerated Judaism, and the moneylenders and the livestock traders in the temple, he faced the Roman Empire. And while his ministry and his death and his resurrection did not convince the Jews that he was their Messiah, because he wasn't this great political leader who vanquished their political adversaries. They believed that their Messiah was going to, liberate the kingdom of Judah of the Romans and all other adversaries. But the Christ not only conquered the Roman Empire, the Christ conquered all of Europe and most of the rest of the world. Because Christianity, we live in a Christian world. The Christ did that. The Christ did that directly because of Jesus of Nazareth's ministry, his death and resurrection, the embodiment of the Christ. He became a living, walking, Christified master, the master of masters. And his legacy was so powerful and lived on, and the Christ continued to do its work even after he disincarnated, even after he ascended into heaven, where he continued the work. The Christ continued what it began in order to be that guiding light for us. And that guiding light is every much within us as our innermost intimate Christ. And it is that lesson, that is where we turn for our guidance. That is where we turn for direction on how to respond to the way of iron that is imposed upon us, or to the way of iron that pops up in our head when we said, I want to do this, or I want to do that, or I should do this, or I should do that. And it's very easy to become cynical. It's easy to become dejected, depressed even. It's easy to allow the breakdown of society, breakdown of structures, breakdown of of the things that we rely on. But all of that is part and parcel with mechanicity, mechanical nature in the way of iron. Iron rusts. Iron returns to the earth as dust, as that red clay dust. And so that whole arc and everything that from ironworks to the final rusting and crumbling and disintegration of iron back into dust. You see that's all there to teach us something. It's all there to mirror us, our own lives. The way of iron is your body. The way of iron is your life. The way of iron is your mechanical self. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. It will return to the dust. And the older you get, and the more creaky your joints get, and the more when you wake up in the morning and you're so stiff and you can't move, you feel like the Tin Man who was left out in the rain overnight, because it feels like your joints have rusted up and seized up. And if you don't feel like that yet, don't worry, you will. It's called getting older. It's called getting old. And we get the rusty joints and the whole works. What's all that? What's all that about? It's leading us down toward the inevitable. Who is the greatest teacher that anybody could ever have? Their own mortality, their own death. Iron is impermanent. Iron is very useful. It's very practical. It's very utilitarian. But it is not eternal. But we can use it to mine for gold. And we can transmute it through the fires and waters. And we can create from it the golden bodies, the human soul, the solar bodies. The way of iron is the impetus, the impulse, the challenge, the adversary and the adversity that creates the conditions in which we can write the verses of our grand epic poem of our lives. Without that iron, we don't have a leg to stand on. We don't. Because without the way of iron, we would not have a physical body. Without the way of iron, we would not have an adversity. We would not know adversity. We would not have an adversary. And so there would be no verses, and there would be no reason to write new verses. And this is our last gasp as a humanity. And it could very well be our last kick at the can, yours and mine, our last kick at the can to awaken and self-realize. We don't know what the future holds. First of all, none of us know when we're going to die. We don't know if we get another lifetime after this. And if we do, we don't know what the conditions are going to be like. So that aspect of iron does challenges us and tests us and reminds us of its utility. And that if you want to go riding on your horse, you better clad its feet with horseshoes, with iron horseshoes. Or if you want to plow your fields, you better have an iron plow. Or if you want to mine for gold, you better arm yourself with an iron pickaxe. And the way of iron says, don't wait. You don't know you don't know how long you have to live. You don't know how long the iron that you're equipped with is going to last. Or if it's going to rust and turn to dust within weeks or months or years, you don't know. But that is the way of iron. It's not eternal. So make use of the here and now. To mine for gold, to do the work, to transmute the lead into gold. To respond to the way of iron, to seek that higher road, the divine path. And use the iron available to you to create that temple for the Christ. Because the temple itself will eventually crumble and collapse and return to dust. But if Christ once enters into your temple in the fullness of accepting it as a house of God, then you can think of that iron that went into that temple as the iron halves of the injection mold. But what's being injected into the mold is the light of Christ, the solar bodies. And then the mold can fall away and will collapse and rust. But the golden solar bodies that fit that mold and were made possible because of that iron mold, they continue, they go on. All of us, without exception, begin with the way of iron. We all work, we all have physical bodies, we all have rational minds, we all have sentimental hearts and lower emotions. We all deal with fear and anger and loneliness and pride and shame and gluttony and laziness, and we all have these ironic emotions. It's ironic that iron and irony are so similar linguistically. But we all start with that. So we all have to work with the way of iron, one way or another. The question is, are we going to make the iron work for us, or are we going to be clapped in irons and kept behind the iron bars and shackled to the way of iron, and so that we go the way of the dust, where we become rust and oblivion, and we become just another of those who would be wailing and gnashing their teeth, because that time is coming. That time is coming. When all that we rely on, or all that we have been conditioned to rely on, starts to crumble, we are challenged to dig deep within ourselves and find ourselves to be greater than what we thought. But that's only if we surrender to that greatness within and allow that greatness to work through us and overcome our conditioned beliefs about ourselves and overcome the limitations that we have been told are ours and that we must abide by, or that we have convinced ourselves. That is what happens when a knight in shining armor is challenged by the Black Knight and his iron lance, or his steel sword, or his iron mace, or morning star, or whatever weapon he comes at us with. We must rise a knight, with honor, with valor, with courage. And like the knights of old, we pray to our innermost. We pray to God to guide our blade and guide our shield, and to stand before this servant of iron that is now confronting us and seeking our destruction. The knight seeks his immortality on the battlefield. That is the way of the warrior. And no warrior is a stranger to iron. So all of this matters in the context of the Iron Age and why the Black Lodge rules. Does anybody have any questions? The great irony of my washing machine repair was that now it seems the hoses that connect the washing machine to the water supply have sprung a leak. They were old and they weren't the highest quality, so I had to order another pair of those as well today. So there's it's always something. It's always something. So the washing machine was working fine, but now there was a leak that developed, and so I have to get these new hoses installed tomorrow, and it's always something. So the way of iron is never so straightforward, and you repair something over here, and then something downstream breaks, or something upstream breaks, and you're constantly going to be running around like playing whack-a-mole, right? If you know that game, you're it's like when you're trying to troubleshoot a computer or something. You think you've gotten to the problem, and then or mechanics know this, right? Working on cars, finicky cars, and problematic cars. Just when you think you've solved the problem, fixed the problem, a new problem springs up over here. So something to keep in mind as you're facing the practical, three-dimensional aspects of the way of iron and the way of mechanicity. So, but I'm open to any questions or comments before we call it a day. Oh, Mugaboo 22 says, thank you, Atlas. You're welcome, Mugaboo. Thank you for being here. I should tell you this. Okay. 2 weeks from today, that's Sunday, April 13th, we will not be having a live stream. My father is expecting guests from Hungary, and I'm going to be playing tour guide, and so I'm going to have family responsibilities. And the 13th, that's a Sunday, we will not be having a live stream as I'm not going to be available. So I'm just letting you know ahead of time. So we will have a show next week, but 2 weeks from now, April 13th, we will not be having a live stream. I'll post as usual that it's been canceled. So just giving you the advance notice. Benjamin says, if we can recognize the shadow of our age, then surely we're also aware of the light that casts it. Yet it seems the minds of many today have been drawn toward distraction, preoccupied with entertainment and the pursuit of pleasure. Could this be what's meant by many are called, but few are chosen? I would say that that the answer there is yes, but it's a little bit more complex than that, because to me, the many are called, but few are chosen has more to do with those who have fallen into idolatry and those who believe that they are saved just because they believe. They believe that Jesus will save them, but they're not doing the work. And yeah, they're distracted. They're preoccupied with whatever they're preoccupying themselves with, but they're not preoccupying themselves with doing the work. And they think that just because they believe that they're saved, but belief is hypnosis and ignorance. They don't know their innermost intimate Christ, but it's nuanced. It's nuanced. So the many are called, few are chosen are those who think that they've answered the call, but they are not taking the necessary steps in order to earn the right to be chosen. So it's the difference between someone who, just as a matter of course, they've been indoctrinated into the belief that if you believe, then you will be among the chosen, versus someone who is humble and assumes that they're not going to be saved and assumes that they're not worthy of being chosen, and that they commit themselves and their lives to doing everything that they can to be the absolute best person they can be and to serve God in in every way that they can. They devote themselves fully and completely, but maintain the humility that that like so it's nuanced. It's nuanced, and it's difficult to put into words. The entertainment and the distraction and the pursuit of pleasure, obviously, that's a problem. But are those people really hearing the call? That's my question to you is, do the people going down to Las Vegas and gambling or pursuing every other kind of entertainment or pleasure or whatever, have they really heard the call? Or is it because that they believe that they're saved already, that they can do all those things and not be bothered by it because, well, I'm saved already. I believe in Jesus. Mugaboo 22 says, do you think old souls and new souls exist? I meet many people who have zero preoccupation with spirituality. Look, someone's preoccupation with spirituality doesn't necessarily say that they're a new soul or an old soul, because they could be an old soul who's degenerated. This whole notion of an old soul, we only have 108 lifetimes in the human kingdom. So an old soul would be someone who's close to the end of their 108 lifetimes, which means that they still haven't awakened and self-realized. So they may be spiritual, they may be finally achieving their goal, or they may have no preoccupation with spirituality, and they might be on their 107th life. There are people at the beginning end of that spectrum and at the end of that spectrum and everywhere in between. So for sure, there's that. And Mugaboo continues, he says, I used to think that this is a young humanity that will grow to become more spiritually mature, but you have showed me that this is an old decaying humanity. Yes, yeah. We're on our last legs. However, to be fair, it may at times feel like we're decades away, but it also may be that we're centuries away. Because remember that even the Roman Empire, it took the Roman Empire centuries to fall. So it may be that this humanity falls over a course of centuries and not decades. Having said that, I'm here, and I've known since childhood that I have an important role to play. So when we talk about downfall, there are stages, right? There's maybe the beginning of the end, and then there's the end of the end. And the beginning of the end may take place, in the next few decades, i.e., in my lifetime, but that may lead into a prolonged downfall, which could take centuries before the end of the end, right? The final curtain. If we think of acts in a play or acts in a movie, we may be coming on the opening of the final act. And it may be that that act will last several centuries before the final curtain drops. But these are very difficult types of predictions to make, and you don't want the problem with saying that, well, it may be we have centuries, right? Because if you say that, then the person's like, oh, well, if I've got centuries, I don't have to worry about this lifetime. I'll worry about it the next lifetime. But we can't take for granted how good we have things now. As terrible as things are getting, we still have it very good. So the beginning of the end might be a lot worse than what we have now, and that might happen within the next few decades. Okay, but that marks the beginning of the end, which means from there things might go really south really fast and just go straight down for centuries to come, which means that before the final curtain, humanity might go through some kind of like dark age like we've never imagined before, where this humanity is reduced to like tribal savagery, like Mad Max stuff, right? Where you see the Road Warrior and Furiosa, right? And all of these post-apocalyptic, scenarios that people have been dreaming up for decades upon decades now in their literature, in their stories, in their science fiction. It's a clearly there's something in the collective consciousness of humanity that says, hey, we're heading into something here that's not going to be pretty. So maybe there's a selection, what the Christians called the rapture, right? Maybe there is a selection of monads that takes place at the beginning of the end. And those who either are awake or show the highest degree of potential of awakening may be taken to a secluded part of the world or maybe taken off planet, and that there may be centuries of further human decay and devolution that take place before the final destruction, the final physical destruction and physical annihilation of humanity, and the entire reorientation and reconfiguration of the global geography and everything else that the planet does as a being, as a living thing, right? Like a snake shedding its skin, right? Which, if you've ever watched a snake shedding its skin, it can be a very violent enterprise, a violent activity, as he's just writhing, he's trying to get himself out from under that dry, crusty, irritating skin. So how this all unfolds, but the reason why I don't like to talk about, the end times might last for centuries, is because you never want to give people a sense of complacency and a sense of, an ability for them to say their laziness to go, oh, well, I'll worry about awakening in the next lifetime. There is another possibility, one that I also don't like to talk about too much, and that is that there is a possibility that things will get bad enough in the short term that, in response to that rusting of the iron age, the way of iron, like demonstrably letting humanity down, that we actually can reorient and help humanity discover metaphysical science and rediscover spirituality and rediscover the religiosity and recognize basically all that I've talked about in my Human 3.0 video and the Attlas Project and Attlas Conscious Arts and all this other stuff. Like, there is that possibility that we can usher in a kind of mini golden age, a kind of the last gasp of this humanity, when humanity lets go of its Iron Age way of thinking and is presented with and introduced to the future golden age way of thinking. excuse me, and that final 200 years or 300 years of this humanity won't be a decline, but will actually be a ramp going in the upward direction. That is a possibility. That's the best case scenario, in fact. But that is the single most unlikely scenario. That's the if every last man, woman, and child on the planet suddenly wins the lottery scenario. That's how unlikely that is. But that's the scenario for which I was born. So to put that in perspective, that's the hand that I'm playing. That's the cards that I'm playing. And it's just that I'm struggling with my own way of iron within, right? And I have to struggle and overcome all identification and attachments for that outcome to be the one that happens. Because I have to be completely realistic and recognize just how impossible that is. And I say impossible because it will take a miracle for it to happen. Miracles are basically those events that are impossible but happen anyway. So I know of some other individuals who are expecting it to happen, right? And like all the new agers who are expecting this sudden mass global awakening to happen and a new golden age just to happen, and they're all intuiting the possibility of that mini golden age, of that preview of what the eventual golden age will be. We'll have a taste of that, a preview of that. But they're all expecting it to happen. I'm not expecting it to happen anymore. I'm open to the possibility, and I'm living my life, and everything that I do is under the potential of it. But I'm completely unidentified or attached to it actually happening. So, but if it does, then the next 100, 200 years of humanity would be very, 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 very different. Certainly than what we have known and what we can imagine. So, but all of this, you see, depends upon our on how we respond to the Iron Age and how we are tested and how we are challenged. Yeah. Any other questions? So remember, 2 weeks from now, April 13th, no live stream. 1 week from now, we will have a live stream, and 3 weeks from now, hopefully, we will also have a live stream. So hopefully, it's just 2 weeks from now will be canceled. But again, you just keep an eye out on Facebook, and you'll get the notifications as always. So if no one has any more comments or questions, I want to thank you all for taking the time and spending it with me here this afternoon. And have a great week. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. Benjamin says, thank you for all the wonderful insights you've shared with us. It has resonated with a lot of things that I also believe in. Have an enjoyable week ahead, sir. Thank you, Benjamin, and you as well. To everybody, have a great week. I look forward to seeing you next week. And as always, take care and inferential peace. Goodbye, everyone.